Hey everybody, Ed home at Old Guy Hi-Fi channel. Yeah, the thumbnail's not clickbait. I promise you it's not. There is no measurement that will tell you how your system will sound or how any system will sound, and we're going to talk about that. Then the whole reason behind this video is I'm not trying to poke the beehive of the measurements crowd. Well, maybe a little bit. I just think that it doesn't need to be complicated. I don't think choosing hi-fi gear, you need to worry about measurements. You need to listen, when you go out for dinner, you might look at a Yelp rating of a restaurant, but you don't look for a chemical analysis of the meal you're going to eat, right? You'll know whether or not it tastes good. And that's the point, is you'll know what sounds good to you. So I'm going to quote Dr. Floyd Toole, who was a legendary, or is a legendary acoustic engineer. He used to run the Canadian National Research Center. He was chief speaker designer and acoustical engineer at JBL, Harmon International. And his quote is, "Two ears and a brain are much smarter than any microphone and analyzer." So let's keep that in mind. So I'm going to get my notes set up. You're going to see, I created a PowerPoint for this. So you're going to see the PowerPoint on screen. I'm going to be down in the corner talking about it, but I want to use the PowerPoint. I want to stay on track. I want to make sure that it is easy for you guys to follow. If you want to refer back to the video for anything, you'll know where everything is located and how it's organized. So we're going to talk about all that. I know this is going to be a long video. I know it's going to create a lot of controversy. I know it's going to create a ton of comments. I know that the measurements folks are going to come out with their pitchforks and torches and come after me. And that's fine. I'm willing to do that because I think it's important that you understand that this is all a subjective hobby. There doesn't need to be any analysis. None of the analysis works anyway. I will concede one measurement. When you see Danny Ritchie do a sweep of a speaker system, frequency response sweep, and it's all bumpy and all over the place, that measurement may give you some indication of how a speaker will sound. But I will tell you, in the long run, ultimately, it doesn't matter, because if he takes let's say a clip speaker, and he measures it and it looks terrible on the measurement, you know what? It doesn't matter, because people are still buying the speaker. So it must appeal to somebody. These are the final arbiters on everything. It's your ears, not my ears, not some measurement tool, none of that. You get to make the choice, and you're the one that has to be happy with the system in the long run. So I'm going to get organized here. We'll come back and I'll start this, rather controversial video. So you're going to see the PowerPoint slides on the full screen. I'm going to be a little picture-in-picture in the bottom right-hand corner of the window. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about the audibility of audio distortions and streaming quality. And it's going to be a technical overview of signal noise ratio, total harmonic distortion, streaming formats, and perceptual limits. So part of what we're going to talk about is how age affects hearing, and I think you'll be surprised. So for me, it is very important to understand that I don't think signal noise ratio has a great deal of relevance in everyday life, and we'll talk about that. Signal noise ratio measures signal strength relative to background noise in decibels. So CD quality, 16-bit regular Red Book CD, has a theoretical signal noise ratio of 96 dB approximately. We all agree that's beautiful, that's wonderful, that's amazing. And especially when you consider so many of us are into vinyl, that even with the most expensive high-end vinyl system, playback system you can get, you're never going to achieve a signal noise ratio really any more than about 65 dB. So what are we all worried about? 140 dB or whatever, synads of minus, 145 dB. Who cares? It doesn't really matter. So again, we've got CDs at 96 dB. We agree that's really good. Now, human hearing has a signal noise ratio dynamic range of about 120 dB under absolutely perfect conditions. And our normal threshold for signal noise ratio is about 80 to 90 dB. Equipment with a signal noise ratio of greater than 100 dB is it's inaudible. You just can't hear it. And you'll get that out of some of the good high-end DACs and things like that. And with lossless streaming, Cobuzz Tidal, in high res, you can start to approach that CD signal noise ratio theoretically. That's the point, is theoretically. So let's talk about at what level does signal noise ratio become audible for us. So so much depends on your listening environment, volume level, music content, our sensitivity to it. But there's some general accepted thresholds. So less than 60 dB signal noise ratio is clearly audible. It's very similar to vinyl playback. We hear the pops and clicks. Sometimes you can hear some rumble, whatever. Doesn't mean it's bad, especially on vinyl playback, because the distortions there tend to be harmonic and very pleasing. 60 to 80 dB, the noise may be really quietable during quiet passages or on super sensitive speakers. If you've ever had really ultra sensitive speakers, every once in a while you hear a little hiss out of the tweeter. And that could be system signal noise ratio too. It could be, a hum from the transformer. It could be a lot of different things. 80 to 90 dB signal noise ratio is super quiet, virtually inaudible. 90 dB or greater, it's inaudible. You're not going to hear it at all, not even a little bit. So I think the most important part is, as long as we're 100 dB, well, actually, as long as we're 96 dB or greater, signal noise ratio is meaningless. If we're streaming or we're listening to the CDs, we're fine, right? We're good to go. And if we've got good equipment, we're good to go. So let's discuss why total harmonic distortion is really a useless specification, honest to God. Total harmonic distortion quantifies added harmonics compared to the original music signal. The audible thresholds are less than 0.1%, usually inaudible, less than 1.3 to 1% potentially audible, but virtually inaudible. Greater than 1%, yeah, you're going to hear some of that distortion. And a lot of times we've got speakers that exceed 1% THD. And so does the THD of the DAC or the amplifier or whatever matter if your speaker is at 1% or thereabouts? No, obviously it doesn't. And again, 0.3 to 1%, that can be audible. Sometimes people, and that's again where a lot of speakers live as far as THD, and the sound of that could be described as some warmth or certainly coloration. If we're at 0.1 to 0.3%, man, that's not very audible at all. And a lot of times that's where tube amplifier designers design their THD to kind of fall within, to give that kind of warmth, that sort of lovely tubiness that we all crave. Hey, listen, if you're a measurements nut, no one would ever buy a tube amplifier. They don't measure that great. And honestly, who cares? And they can sound wonderful. And that's the point. Less than 0.1% is inaudible. That you're not going to hear it. And sometimes you'll see specifications 0.0000 ad nauseum percent THD, completely meaningless. Here's the thing. THD was literally created in the 70s by audio manufacturers as a marketing tool, a way to differentiate their product from someone else's. So we were coming off the 50s and 60s, a lot of tube gear, lots of THD in that 1% range all day long, right? With that kind of more primitive tube gear, early circuit designs, things like that. So starting in the 70s when solid state came out, manufacturers needed a hook to hang their hat on to say, mine's better than the other guys. So THD, watts obviously became a big thing. I got more watts than anybody else. The Watt Wars, we all remember that. Well, many of us remember that. But THD became a real marketing tool. So Sansui would come out with an amplifier and say, oh, I've got 0.1 THD. And Pioneer would come out and say, oh, I've got 0.01 THD. And Marantz would come out and say, oh, I got 0.001 THD. You don't hear that, but it was a marketing device, because as consumers, we don't always understand how to rate or quantify a product. So we go based on marketing speak. And it happens to us all the time. It's like buying one version of a Mercedes-Benz C-Class versus another. This one has 300 horsepower. This one has 600 horsepower. All right, well, this one's going to be faster, but do you need 600 horsepower? No, right? You don't. So it is important to remember that THD was initially a marketing thing. So vanishing TD, and what happened was during the late 70s into the 80s, the manufacturers were trying to one-up each other, not only in wattage output, but in low THD numbers, and it caused them to apply so much negative feedback into their amplifiers that the sound just got absolutely horrible. Some of those early mid-80s stuff was just absolutely terrible sounding. Not good at all. And I know there's going to be some nostalgia around it. We didn't know any better at the time because speakers in those days weren't that great either. Technology's moved so far forward that the gear we have now is so much better than the gear we used to have, just from tolerance of components engineering, design, CAD CAM, finite model analysis, all of those things, everything now, and especially speakers, I think have had the greatest technological leap and improvement in quality of any of our hi-fi products. So again, THD was a marketing, don't let it fool you. It is, if it's 0.1% or less, you're never going to hear it. So it really doesn't matter, and you don't need to worry about it. That's the good news. Well, here's another one that's a carryover from the 70s and all the marketing speak is, how much power, amplifier power, do we really need? You'd be surprised. It's not as much as you think. To calculate how much amplifier power is needed for different listening levels, we'll need to determine what a speaker sensitivity is. So as an example, I'm going to use a theoretical speaker, and I think I have one here that is. It's 87 dB at 1 watt, 1 meter. So what does that mean? That means that 1 meter away with a microphone, if you put 1 watt of power into it, you'll get 87 decibels of sound pressure level, SPL. Now, if you double that power, you make it 2 watts, you'll get 90 dB of SPL at 1 meter. And if you reduce it by 3 dB, you have the power. So if we're going to go 84 dB, we only need half a watt to do that. So let's talk about kind of the target SPLs based on that 87 dB unit. So if we're going to listen at 70 dB, and this is at 1 meter, if we're going to listen at 70 dB, we only need 0.02 watts, 20 milliwatts. If we're going to listen at 75 dB, we only need 0.063 or 63 milliwatts. At 80 dB, we need 0.2 watts. At 90 dB, we need 2 watts. So that's it. Now, what are some of the other things that we can talk about? Well, one of them is room gain, and I'm going to switch my script around so I can talk to you about room gain because I did measure that, and I think it's important for you to understand. So I think room gain is an important concept for us to understand because I will tell you right now, the room has the biggest impact on your hi-fi system. It doesn't matter what the equipment is, doesn't matter what the speakers is. The room is probably 70% of what you're hearing. So understanding how things interact and how they live in your room, I think is very important. And room gain is one of the big bugaboos about setting up a good hi-fi system. Is your room really reflective? Is it over-damped? All of those things, dimensions, side walls, ceiling height, floor coverings, the kind of furniture, drapes on the, window treatments, all of those things can affect the sound quality and how you perceive imaging and bass and so forth. So most of the time, with room gain, it's going to be in the bass and lower mid-bass region of frequencies. You'll hear people talk about, I have a bass gain, I have a bump, I have a node, I have a suck out, all of these other things. That's what prompted the subwoofer crawl. You put the subwoofer in your sitting position, you crawl around the perimeter of the room until you find the spot where it sounds the most natural, and that's where you put your subwoofer. Now, that's not always practical for most of us. I'm fortunate in my room was designed as a listening room from the get-go. So having my subwoofer dead in the center between my two speakers is best for overall performance, in my opinion. So let's talk about room gain again. So we're the basic rule of thumb is we looked at our speakers at 87 dB, 1 watt, 1 meter, but we're not sitting there anymore. So my room measured it is 16 feet wide, 4.9 meters. It is 25 feet deep, 7.6 meters, and 8-foot ceilings, 2.4 meters. So I've got roughly 16 by 25 by 8. It's 3,200 cubic feet or 90.6 meters squared. Now, my room is moderately treated. I do have some acoustic absorption on the sidewalls. I'm fortunate in my room is my room. It's a listening room. I don't have to share it with anybody else in the family. They come down and listen, but it's not a living space per se. So I'm free to put stuff up on the walls. But let's assume a moderately treated room. You got some drapes, you got some big furniture, you got some floor coverings, those kinds of things. I think it's pretty safe to assume we're going to get 3 dB of gain. So if we adjust our sensitivity based on that 3 dB, if we look at every time we double the distance, we're away from the speaker itself, we approximately lose 6 dB of sound pressure. So if I go from 1 meter to 2 meters, minus 6 dB of sound pressure. If I go from 2 meters to 3 meters, roughly where I'm sitting, about 5 dB of sound pressure drop. So total drop, let's figure, is an even 11 dB. So if I adjust the sensitivity for my listening at 3 meters away, my original 87 dB 1 watt 1 meter speakers, now if I feed it 1 watt, I'm only going to get 76 decibels of sound pressure level 3 meters away. I think that's really important. So let's talk about sound pressure levels and how we perceive them. 70 dB is considered quiet, moderate. It's kind of background listening. 75 dB is very comfortable, more conversational, easy listening level. 80 dB, that's getting pretty loud. It's moderately loud. That's still a great listening level for peaks and things like that. 90 dB, that's loud. That's too loud. If you're listening to live music at greater than 90 or 95 dB, do yourself a favor, put in some earplugs. You'll still hear the music. You'll still enjoy the event. Let's say you go into a live concert, protect your hearing. It's very, very important. So taking that into account, we saw how much power we needed if we were just 1 meter away. So let's recalculate that based on 3 meter distance with the loss of distance from the speaker and then adding in the room gain. So if my target SPL is 70 dB, I need 0.25 watts to achieve 70 decibels. If my target SPL is 75 dB, I need 0.79 watts to achieve 75 dB. If my target listening level is 80 dB, and again, we're getting pretty loud, that's only 2.5 watts that's needed. Now, if I want to do 90 dB, we're looking at 25 watts. So what does all of that mean as far as how much power do we actually need? You don't need a lot of power, honestly. I mean, unless you want to listen at very high levels or you have really low sensitivity speakers below 85 dB in that range, honestly, we could all get away with 30 to 50 watts. My recommendation always is target between 50 and 100 watts for your amplification, assuming you have a speaker somewhere between 87 and 93 dB sensitivity. Even at 86 dB, 100 watts is plenty. Now, a lot of high-end gear has gabillions of watts. Well, that's because a lot of high-end speakers are really tough to drive, especially when they have, literally a dozen drivers in them and the complex crossovers and all of those other things. You need power. And amplifier power, watts are kind of not really an adequate way to measure it. It would be better if we knew what the watts plus what the current output is. So if you think of an engine, we all talk about horsepower, but what actually represents the ability of an engine to do work? Torque rating does. So you can have a big lazy V8, back when the Malaise days here in the United States when we had 350 cubic inch V8s that made 165 horsepower, but they made 300 foot-pounds of torque. That push, that's what the motive force of it. So think of watts as horsepower and current amperage as the torque. No one does a lot of current rating, and I don't know why. I wish they did. But it all started in the 70s with THD and the watt wars and all that other stuff. We all became preoccupied with watts because we didn't know how else to gauge whether or not something was going to be a good product to buy. No one bothered to tell us back in those days, use your ears. And that's what I'm telling you to do. Use your ears. So anyway, that's talking about room gain. Let's move on to the next subject. So let's talk about streaming versus CD playback. As you can see, with streaming formats, how it is delivered to you has a big effect on it. So can streaming sound as good as CDs? Theoretically, yes. Practically, probably not yet, although we're getting better at it, I think. So if you take Spotify's free service, you're looking at 128 kilobits, Ogg Vorbis, 16-bit equivalent. It's about an 80 to 85 dB signal noise ratio, and it's lossy. You will hear that. Now, if you do their premium service, that's 320 kilobits Ogg Vorbis, 16-bit equivalent. That's about 90 dB signal noise ratio. Still lossy, much better. And I'll tell you what, I use Spotify all the time for background music, in the car. Your car, what's the signal noise ratio? What's the noise level in your car at 65 miles an hour on the highway? 50, 60 dB? Anyway, so Spotify Premium 320, for a lot of people, that's fine. And a lot of people at 90 dB signal noise ratio, that's perfect, not a problem. When we get into Tidal Hi-Fi, that's FLAC, that's 1644. Theoretically, that has a 96 dB signal noise ratio. The high-res files, because of their greater bit depth, remember 16-bit CD, theoretically 96 dB, 24-bit, regardless of what the sample rate is, 196, 192, whatever, you're looking at theoretically about 100 to possibly, and I don't think it's practical, 120 dB of signal noise ratio. Same with Apple Music and Qobuz with 24, 192 FLAC files or ALAC files. So theoretically, we're going to get at best 96 dB of signal noise ratio from streaming because there are so many other things going on. I think all streaming services add some level of equalization or change or whatever to deliver the files over the internet. And you've got, you know, these signals coming through a gabillion miles of wire and God knows what kind of networking gear and everything else. So if we can hope for 96 dB, I think that's the best we're ever going to hope for. And it's going to rival CD, although I will tell you, I have plenty of CDs, thousands of them. And if I listen to the streaming version versus the CD version always sounds much better, more dynamic, less compressed. And although I don't think any of the streaming services other than Spotify claim to compress anything, I think there's something going on there. I really do. So important notes are 16-bit audio like CD or standard FLAC files. And I have 1 million FLAC files on a hard drive and they sound pretty much like CDs. The theoretical maximum signal noise ratio is 96 dB. Any of the lossy codecs in an actual practice, I'm not sure we're getting any better, even with high res, any better than about 100 dB. So the key thing is a lot's going to depend on your streaming service. Not all streamers are the same. If you're using a small, inexpensive $100 streamer, the quality of that stream is not going to be as good as if you're using a much more expensive streamer, something $500 or whatever. You know, Stream Magic, maybe Eversolo, certainly Shanling, certainly Lumen. There's a lot of folks out there that do really good streaming engines, and that streaming engine is an important consideration, not only just the DAC chip. So there are good streamers out there. Pair them up with a good DAC. You're going to get really good performance. And yes, you'll probably get near or at that CD level of 96 dB signal noise ratio. So again, I think CDs sound much better, but streaming is stupid convenient. Oh my gosh, it makes it so much easier. And when I'm listening just for pleasure, I'm streaming all the time. I use Artivana as my streamer from a dedicated Artivana server, and that is amazing sound quality, just wonderful. Yeah, I love it. Now, when I'm doing some critical listening, if I'm reviewing something critically, honest to goodness, I will use CD as my source because it's repeatable and it's easy to go back and listen to stuff and, you know, hit playback or hit fast forward, whatever. I just find it much easier to do. And I think I'm getting a better sound quality, which lets me then review that piece of gear, I think, more accurately. So now the last controversial subject is, how does age affect hearing? So how does age affect our auditory perception? Well, there's no question that there is such a thing as age-related hearing loss. It's absolutely a true thing. And you get, as you age, you get reduced sensitivity to noise, distortion at high frequencies, things like that. So let's talk about this age-related hearing loss. And there's a word for it on the screen I'll never be able to pronounce. So as we age, our sensitivity to high frequencies diminishes, often starting early as our 30s. And I'm going to change that a bit because there is a ton of anecdotal evidence out there saying that actually high frequency hearing loss starts much earlier than that because of the prevalence of in-ear listening devices, headphones, things like that. People commuting with their headphones or earbuds on a train, a very noisy environment, they got it turned up. People outside, you know, got it turned up because of ambient noise around them. So I think that we actually, age-related hearing loss is starting much earlier. I think it's actually starting in late teens, early 20s, depending on listening habits and how loud we're using our earbuds. And that's an important thing to consider. So as a typical rule, if you're in your teens to your 20s, theoretically, you can hear out to 20,000 cycles. In your 30s to 40s, probably 14 to 16 kilohertz. 50s to 60s, about 12 to 14 kilohertz. Older than 70, 8 to 12 kilohertz. Again, it may be lower. And again, a lot of it depends on your life experience and your exposure to loud noises. If you worked in a manufacturing environment or on let's say a construction site where there's lots of noise, those things will damage your hearing over time without question. Also, too, it is extraordinarily common for, as you age, to get tinnitus. Now, tinnitus doesn't affect your high frequency hearing. It just becomes annoying. It doesn't affect your ability to hear things. It just can be a distraction that you just kind of have to live with. So the impact of age on perception of audio distortions. High frequency noise is often less noticeable with age as our high frequency sensitivity decreases. Now, total harmonic distortion. Low order harmonic distortion, second and third, is audible even with age. Higher order high frequency harmonics become harder to detect, obviously. Dynamic range compression is absolutely audible regardless of age because it's not based on frequency, it's based on loudness and content not frequency. Lossy artifacts. Older listeners may find those artifacts of 128 kilobit Ogg Vorbis Spotify less bothersome because the distortions and so forth live in that kind of 12 to 20 kilohertz frequency range. Ultrasonic detail in high-res audio, that's largely inaudible for almost anybody. If you're over 30, you're not going to hear that. So arguably, the high-res benefits tend to come from better mastering, not the ultrasonic content, and better, ability to capture, the room sound, things like that. So interestingly, listening habits have a little effect on hearing acuity. Experience and attention can compensate for somewhat diminished hearing. Older listeners with a lifetime of critical listening may still be highly sensitive to tonal balance, mid-range clarity, and dynamic nuance, even if the high frequency range is reduced. Many veteran audiophiles detect subtle differences in equipment that younger listeners miss, not because of better ears, but due to trained audible perceptions. That's where I think a lot of us fall, and will deal with me, because I get lots of lovely comments saying, oh, you're old and deaf and you can't hear anything. Well, I will tell you, back just before Christmas, I went and had my hearing test. I went and saw my audiologist, Dr. Hifi. And normally when you do a listening test at an audiologist, it is the frequency range they use is primarily the vocal range of frequencies. So somewhere between 300 and maybe 5,000 on the top end cycles is where they're testing your hearing, because again, the ability to discern vocals is far more important to most people than almost anything else. And with a lot of people, they get in a crowded room and they can't hear anything individually. So the ability to pull out voice is important. Well, I told Dr. Hifi, I said, I want to do a 20 to 20,000, and she did it with me. And I was good up to 14,300 cycles, which is pretty darn good. I can still hear fluorescent lights. So my high frequency hearing is fine. It can change. Now, I've been careful with my hearing. I am very much a trained listener. I've been doing this for decades, honestly, and I'm not trying to blow my own horn. I'm not any better than anybody else. I just have an awful lot of experience. I get to hear a lot of different things. Change a speaker, change a cable in my system, and I promise you, and people are going to hate this, I'll hear that difference. You may not, because you don't know what the other cable sounded like, or you don't have the experience, or you don't have the database of different sorts of perceived sounds. And audible memory is terrible, but you can, if you hear something, it will trigger a memory. If you don't hear it, it's hard to describe. But I can walk in and say, you can blindfold me, and I haven't heard a pair of clip speakers in years. I'll walk into a room, I'll tell you they're clip speakers, because the sound of it will bring back the memory of it. So anyway, I think that's really important. The final takeaway is high frequency details and very low level noise become harder to perceive as we age. No question about it. But most meaningful music distortions, like the obvious THD, compression, noise and quiet passages, kind of remain audible into our older age groups. And the benefit of extremely low THD or greater than 100 dB signal noise ratio may be lost on aging ears, but the enjoyment of good sound absolutely is not lost. So I think that's very important. Our hobby has aged, no question about it. I think it's important that we understand that age doesn't diminish your ability to enjoy good hi-fi and good music, and I think that's an important thing. So let's summarize this thing. What's our summary and our takeaways? So aim for signal noise ratio of greater than 90 dB and you're going to be fine. Aim for a THD of less than 0.1% and you're going to be fine. Don't worry about all of the other nonsense. And honestly, when it comes to amplifiers, if you see 0.0000 whatever THD, if it's a Class D, it's a little bit different. If it's a Class AB amplifier, they're putting so much negative feedback through that circuit that it's going to just sound like crap. If you remember my review of the Topping B200 mono blocks, oh my gosh, they had so much global negative feedback through them that nested feedback, that nested composite feedback circuitry just killed the sound of that thing. And so just keep that in mind, that ultimately the lowest THD number isn't necessarily going to mean better sound. So real world room gain and SPL affects our needs for amplifier power. So keep that in mind. We typically don't need as much as we think we do. Most streaming services offer sufficient sound quality for casual listening. I find that to be true. Now, I stream from Artivana, which I think is the highest resolution, best streaming platform there is for sonics, for audible. Just, it's remarkable. I also, it's a dedicated PC. It runs into USB isolators. All of my USB cables have ferrite cores on them to strip off any random EMI or EMF. Everything goes into a USB isolator before it plugs into either the DDC reclocker or the DAC. I use really good DACs, I use really good cables, I use really good preamps, amps, speakers, all of that other stuff to try to make sure my chain is as clean and as perfect as I can for when I'm streaming. A lot of times when I'm doing reviews, when I'm doing critical reviews and I'm listening for sound quality, and it may not be the music I include in the review, I'm using CDs, or oftentimes I'm using vinyl as well, because that helps me kind of hear things the right way. So again, most streaming services, if you're running Tidal or Qobuz and you're getting 1644, that's going to be about as good as you're going to get. The 24192, a lot's going to depend on your DAC and all the other stuff in your system, whether or not you're using USB isolators or reclockers or whatever. But those are all things, again, you can be very happy with that sound. Aging does affect high frequency hearing ability, but it doesn't affect our ability to enjoy the music we're listening to. I think that's an important takeaway. And system synergy and room gain and all of those other things, the room setup, often means more than specifications of a product. And I think that is absolutely true. Again, I think I said earlier, the room is probably 70% of what you hear. So that's super important. So that's kind of the summary. Again, trust your ears. They're never going to lie to you. You know what sounds good to you. A spec doesn't tell you how something sounds. Doesn't. As I mentioned before, maybe the only spec that matters is if you do a frequency I'll get it out, a frequency sweep on a speaker and you see those jumpy, jagged lines like Danny Ritchie does. That can maybe give you an indication that it's going to be harsh or it's out of phase or there's going to be a suck out. That's good. That's important. But ultimately, I don't know how much it matters because people are still buying those speakers no matter how they measure. So ultimately it becomes the listener's ear is the final arbiter. Again, trust your ears. That's the most important thing. I think that's everything. I know I'm going to get a ton of comments. I will publish my syllabi in the community post. Here's one thing I would like to say before I finally wrap everything up. If you're nasty in the comments, I'm going to delete the comment. My comment section is not a democracy. It's not a place for you to pontificate and vent on whatever it is and write, a War and Peace length comment telling everybody how smart you are and how much you know. Well, okay, that's great, and I'm glad you feel that way about yourself, but that's not what my comment section is for. My comment section is for legitimate, if you want to make a legitimate point, a logical argument, you want to state your let's say, disagreement with me and back it up with a cogent, logical argument, I want to read that. I want to hear that. I think our interchange in the comments, I think that back and forth communication, for me, it's very rewarding. Sometimes it's very frustrating, but for me, it's very rewarding. I think that's important. If you've got questions, I want to hear that. One thing I do need to say, if you're asking me to compare one product to another, if you go back, and I've got playlists and all my videos are there, if I haven't reviewed it, I can't answer the question. So I apologize for that. So again, in the comment section, let's keep it polite. Let's keep it, let's keep it logical. Let's keep our dissertation, very, thought-provoking and, reasonable and just polite. And I think, good manners is an important thing. So anyway, that's enough of that. Holy smokes, this was a different video, wasn't it? It's very interesting. Well, hopefully you got something out of it. I really do. I'm doing this for an educational reason, not necessarily to kind of promote myself as a know-it-all. A lot of people think I am. Maybe at some level I think I am, but I really don't want to be that guy. I just want to share my passion for the hobby and I want to share my experiences with it. And hopefully that helps you on your journey through your audio life, your hi-fi life. So anyway, given all of that, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. About 60% of you that watch my videos aren't subscribed. It's free to donate your subscription. You can always take it back if you don't like what I'm doing. That's fine. But it does help the channel grow. And as you've seen through some of the videos, I'm getting some very, very good gear into review. Obviously, we can have some fun with that together. I would like to take a moment and thank my members and my channel subscribers. You guys support me wonderfully. Thank you so very much. I do appreciate it. There will be, as I mentioned, a link in the community post with the syllabi in it. It won't be a link. It'll be the actual syllabi published there. There are, in the video description, there will be in the pinned comment and video description a channel membership link if you are so inclined. If you'd also like to support the channel and you're watching on your portable device or computer, down along this side, I think, is a thank you button. You can thank me there and buy me a granola bar if you want. Also, too, there are some affiliate links in the video description. You guys understand how that works. I'm starting to trim those back a bit. I don't want anybody to think I'm a salesman for this stuff, although the affiliate income does help defray costs for buying new lights and handling all kinds of other stuff. I had to buy a stair climbing hand truck to move some of these frickin' 100-pound speakers around. It's been fun. It's been interesting. So anyway, please like, subscribe, comment. Follow me on Instagram if you want to. My name is Ed Homewood. This is the Old Guy Hi-Fi channel. And please take some time today to put on some of your most favorite music and just sit back, listen, and relax and let the cares of the day just kind of wash away. This was a long video. You gave me a lot of time if you stuck it out. I am grateful for it. Thank you so much. I really hope you have a wonderful day.